Welcome to this module on software reuse and licenses. In the previous module, you learned what licenses are, what are the common types of licenses that exist, and why they matter for you when you want to share your work. In this module, we will look at how licenses of third-party tools and libraries that you may reuse could restrict your choice of licenses for your own work. So your code is ready and working, you are ready to share it with your fellow researcher. The first thing to do is to decide which files you will include in your distribution package. Make sure to include all your code, data, configuration, and documentation files. Despite being your own creation, your code relies on a number of pre-existing tools and libraries. Such libraries may be very common, like the Python interpreter or a C++ compiler. You do not need to include those in your package, your users should be able to acquire them on their own. But be aware that everything that you do not include in your package and that is required to run your tool should be mentioned in your documentation. But you could also include less common third-party libraries, and you may decide to include those for a number of reasons. First, you may have modified the implementation of the library to adjust it to fit your purpose. In this case, you will need to redistribute the modified version of the library. Maybe you obtained the code from a personal website that is not maintained, and you are worried about the long-term accessibility of the code. Or maybe the library was somewhat hard to install, and you want to include it in your package to ease the installation process. In all those cases, you will have to consider how including third-party code in your package will affect your licensing option. Let us consider a number of scenarios where we're trying to decide on the license to use for NewTool, a software that we wrote ourselves. NewTool relies on Superlib, a third-party library that we will include in our package. In practice, Superlib may be a data parser for a specific input, a mathematical solver, or any utility that we may use. The question here is the following. Given that we will include Superlib in our package, and given the license under which Superlib is released, what licenses are available for NewTool, and what kind of constraints are we under? We will have a look at this situation for fairly common types of licenses, namely the MIT, Apache, GPL, and EUPL license. For each license, we will consider two cases. The one on the left, where Superlib is used in its original version, we made no changes to it, we will redistribute the verbatim version of the library. And the case on the right, where we use the modified version of the Superlib code that we modified ourselves. Let's start with the first case where Superlib is distributed under an MIT license. If we want to include the original library in our package, then all we need to do is to include the license information that was distributed with the Superlib package in the NewTool package. This is achieved by simply copying license file from the Superlib package into the NewTool package. Once this is done, we are free to distribute NewTool under any license we want. If we made modification to the Superlib code, then the situation is exactly the same with respect to license information. Copy all license information from the Superlib package into the NewTool package, and we are free again to choose the license we want, including commercial licenses. If Superlib is distributed under an Apache 2 license and we want to include the verbatim version of the library, then we need to include all license information from the Superlib package into our package. Once this is done, we are free to license NewTool in any way we want. However, if we modify the implementation of the Superlib library, we will have to take a few extra steps. We have to include all license information, as well as any notice file that may have been distributed with the Superlib package into our package. If we redistribute the modified Superlib code, then we must document which part of the original Superlib implementation we modified. This can be done by documenting changes in a README file, or by marking the changes inside each individual source file. Be careful to preserve any pre-existing license information. Once we've done that, we are free to pick any license we want for the NewTool package. So what if Superlib is distributed under a GPL3 license? Well, first, if we are redistributing the verbatim version of the Superlib, then we need to include all license information provided in the Superlib package into the NewTool package. Additionally, we must provide a link to the source code of the Superlib library. Indeed, GPL licenses are open source licenses, so regardless of what we do, we need to provide access to all the GPL source code that we reused, verbatim or modified. Once this is done, we are free to pick any license we want for NewTool. If we modify the implementation of Superlib, however, the situation is a bit different. We still need to include all license information and any notice file that may be included in the superlib package. Then we must document which part of the superlib source code was modified. Be careful again with the license statement in all files. We may add to them, but we cannot remove non-modified. Finally, we will need to provide access to the modified superlib code. The GPL license requires us to redistribute modified GPL code under a GPL license. Therefore, if we can separate in our implementation the code of new tool from the code of superlib, then what we can do is distribute not one, but two packages. One with a modified superlib under a GPL license, and in a separate package, new tool under any license that we want. If we cannot separate the two, then we must distribute everything, new tool and superlib, under a GPL license. Finally, let's have a look at the European Union public license. So if superlib is distributed under such license and we did not modify the code, then all we need to do is to include the license information provided in a superlib package into the new tool package, and then we are free to license it in any way that we want. But be careful, we must still provide access to the original superlib source code. If we modify the implementation of superlib, then we must include all license information, notice file, and indicate where the changes were performed. And we must make the modified code available to everyone. All modified versions of superlib must be distributed under an EUPL compatible license. So, like for the GPL license, we may choose to distribute two packages instead of one, allowing us to choose any license for our new tool. Those were the 4 most common types of licenses and how they affect potential reuse. Here are a few takeaways. First, always check the license of the tool that you reuse, whether there was a simple line of code or commercial tool. This is of the utmost importance when sharing your work with others. If you did not share third-party code at all, then all the licensing issue becomes much simpler. Be aware that not sharing third-party tools is always a good option. Finally, if you are reusing someone else's code or work, then make sure that you mention where the information comes from. In most cases, this is the only thing that is requested of you. You must preserve license information of what was provided. In some cases, you may be asked to share your code. When in doubt, there might be someone in your institution who can assist you. Those may be your contract team, the legal department, or the library data support. Do not hesitate to contact them. On a final note, you might find scripts or fragments of code on the web, on Q&A websites or forums. Those are usually still subject to copyright, but licenses do not apply here, so feel free to use them in your project as long as you understand how they work. Our recommendation is that you should indicate to the member of those community which fragments of code worked, the ones that didn't, indicate which suggestions were useful to you. Try to contribute meaningfully. We thank you for your attention and good luck with your software. We hope to see many open source tools in the future.